to DataTalk. I'm Kathleen Peters, Chief Innovation Officer at Experian Fraud and Identity, and your host for the Fraud Frontline series. Today, I'll be chatting with Nash Ali, Experian VP of Fraud Strategy, about the role and impact of Fintechs in fraud. Welcome, Nash.
Good morning, Kathleen. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Nash, I'm so excited to be able to kick off this series speaking with you. We have so many great conversations together, and I'm excited because this month, of course, is the month for International Fraud Awareness Week. So this seems like a great time to be having these conversations. You and I both recently spoke at Money 2020. And it was a great show. I'm sure you agree. Experian had a big presence there. And being at Money 2020 actually inspired the conversation that I wanted to have with you today. So as I think about Money 2020, and of course, the inception for that show was really grounded in the growth and the ascent of fintechs, and certainly still carries that fintech theme. So I was thinking, for our conversation, I wanted to explore how fintechs have really changed the overall fraud landscape. So when I think about and set aside even fraud for just a moment, when I think about the influence of fintechs broadly, what comes to mind for me is their focus on digital engagements and especially on unique user experience. And so there's a lot of really good disruption that has come from fintechs. Don't you think so?
Couldn't agree more, Kathleen. Can't go to a show these days and not talk about the changes that have come about with fintechs. I think the rise of fintechs in the last several years has just brought about this whole digital revolution. We've seen modern instantaneous banking, instant lending, real-time P2P payments, both domestic and cross-border. We've seen alternate payments and wallets, cryptocurrencies, now stable coins, and all the focus on stablecoin. And all of this is being led by fintechs. In the current world, that continues to be the case. We see fintechs being first adopters of things like GenAI and Agentic AI, and so this trend continues.
Sure.
And I think what's equally interesting is that with all of the changes that fintech is bringing about in the financial landscape, we're also seeing a corresponding surge in fraud and the fraud landscape, and that's also attacking the fintechs and the changes that are coming about with their adoption of new tech.
I think you're right. I think it's that quest for speed, really focusing on those digital experiences that opens doors for fraudsters too.
No question about it. I think one thing that we've continued to see is that with authorized push payments, with real-time payments, instantaneous settlement and availability of funds, transactions continue to grow. They're largely irreversible, so there's not a whole lot of collection that can happen or reversible transactions that can happen anymore. So fraud losses have continued to escalate. And now with the advent of new technologies like GenAI and automation and bots, we're starting to see that these fraud trends are becoming much larger and being committed on a large scale with fraud rings. And this has become big business in so many parts of the globe. We're seeing deepfakes and identity documents being created with great precision. We're seeing voice cloning and site cloning. And these are things that we hadn't seen in the prior years, but now they're being committed by large organized crimes, large organized gangs. And so scams have started to rise at an exponential pace as well.
I think it's come along with those developments. There's been a lot of really good disruption, as you mentioned, and fintechs definitely, I think it's in their nature. They're willing to experiment with new approaches and with emerging technologies, with new analytics, new data sources. I think about even their approach to fraud prevention. They've built a lot of their own tools. But they've also been those early adopters. They've been early adopters of supervised and unsupervised machine learning, for example, and using those kinds of models to detect fraud and new techniques.
Yes, I think fintechs, what strikes me about fintechs is they are early adopters of new tech. They are focused on consumer experience, and consumer experience being paramount these days. They are one of the few segments that really place an emphasis on consumer experience. They've also been early adopters of new tech from a fraud mitigation perspective. We've continued to see that. They have been the adopters of technology like you just mentioned, behavioral analytics with NeuroID. They've been early adopters of physical biometrics and even to some extent passkeys and some of the mobile driver's licenses and digital identity verification, facial recognition. These are things that they started adopting and the rest of the industries followed.
It's true. They are definitely pioneers that the broader industry will copy for sure. They're certainly not the only ones using these techniques anymore. Obviously, so much of financial services has gone through digital transformation led by the experiments from the fintechs themselves. So fintechs aren't the only ones using advanced techniques anymore. Do you think that they still lead the way? They're obviously historically had built a lot of their own tools in-house. It's kind of the fintech way, build it yourself. But even the fintechs are maturing. Do you think that they are still leading the way? How do you feel?
I feel like they are, but it's always a cat and mouse game, right? And I always put my fraud hat on, and as a risk manager, I look at where is fraud going and how is fraud attacking the financial services sector. And I see that fraud has started to figure out those vulnerabilities in the current fraud stack, the way that fintechs mitigate fraud.
You're right. Fraudsters are innovative, they're organized, they are motivated, and they don't have those same kinds of constraints. They are definitely the early adopters, and they've proven to be early adopters of generative AI. We definitely know that.
Yeah.
If generative AI is a new weapon in their arsenal, what do you think are the right countermeasures? Are fintechs ready for that fight? Is the industry at large ready for this new fight?
I've always said fight fire with fire, Kathleen. So, there's only real one countermeasure to the modern fraud vectors, and that is GenAI. You have to use GenAI to fight GenAI committed fraud. So GenAI committed fraud is a really interesting beast in itself because there's a large amount of compromised data out there. It's always been there. I think this year alone, we've seen something like 3,200 different data breaches in just the first half of the year alone. Yeah. We're at pace to set a new record here. And now with all of this stolen data that's out there, fraudsters can use this and they can use it at scale.
More efficiently than ever before, right?
Right.
More efficiently.
You write a bot, you write a script. These scripts emulate human behavior, so they're largely able to evade network layer controls. They hit sites with compromised data. They're creating fake identities, synthetic identities at a scale we haven't seen before, at a speed we haven't seen before. And similarly, bots are being used to guess and crack identity or logins. We're seeing credential stuffing attacks. We're seeing credential guessing attacks. We're seeing scams where people are asked to reveal their second factor auth codes. And that's happening more and more. So how do you fight these things? The only way to really fight these things are to use GenAI to your advantage. Can we look at new models? Can we look at new anomaly detection frameworks that can pick up on when a scam is being committed? Can we pick up on when a non-human entity is interacting with a session? Can we pick up on things where there's some link analysis in real time behind the scenes that says the same device or sets of devices is being used to commit compromises on a much larger scale and it's being tied to multiple profiles? I think you've got to start looking at new ways and new lenses of fraud. Otherwise, you're going to simply lose the game.
I think you're right. I also think about how fraudsters are able to use generative AI and other tools to commit more fraud and more fraud at scale. Even things as maybe obvious as assistance to help the fraud investigator teams, to help us deal with the amount of attacks that may be coming in at scale for ourselves and our clients. Any kinds of assistance that can help the the humans to find frauds faster, focus in maybe on where the most likely fraud is occurring. That's capability that's there with AI and GenAI today that I know we're starting to use, and I think our clients are starting to use as well.
100%, completely there with you. And I think we're starting to see, even in the fraud mitigation world, more smart orchestration platforms, as I call them, where there's actual Gen AI being used within the platform itself as a native capability. We're starting to see enterprises start to use these smart orchestration platforms to identify points of high risk and place the right amounts of friction in just those segments of consumers, rather than the big hammer approach that we're all so used to. I log into my favorite bank and I get OTP'd every single time. Doesn't matter who I am, where I am, doesn't matter if I'm coming from a new device, I always get a second factor of auth.
You want to be recognized, right? So part of that is you want to be recognized.
We went out, Kathleen, you're aware, and did this fraud and identity survey at Experian. We surveyed 200 businesses, 2,000 consumers, and what we found is that I'm not alone. Most consumers are asking their financial services providers to place lower amounts of friction. They value consumer experience. They value a low friction experience, and they want to be recognized, exactly like you said. They don't
Not
want...
at the cost of security. They want to feel safe, but there is a high expectation for both.
Absolutely. In fact, 40% of consumers that we surveyed said they want low friction processes, yet they want to feel safe at the same time. And they would abandon a higher friction process online if they had a better alternative. So the question then that we ask is, can the two coexist? Can you coexist safety and security with low friction? And how do you then do that? I think the answer is yes.
I think it's a matter of having the right tools. I think that fintechs have shown us the way quite a bit in that regard. I think that focus on great user experiences, being able to do as much as possible online and digitally, it has created this expectation and this norm for consumers, I believe. Their willingness to try new data sources, to try new tools, to keep the company safe, keep the consumer safe, is something that we can certainly take away from the approach that fintechs have taken.
Yeah. One thing that, Kathleen, that fintechs, as I look at how they implement fraud mitigation, that I've learned, and it's valuable, is that one size doesn't have to fit all. You don't have to put all your consumers in the same bucket. If you can measure the amounts of risk by individual, by session, you can start to segment your user population in a smart way. And for each of those segments, you can place different types of friction, different types of fraud controls. So if I'm the same guy coming in from the same device, coming in from the same location, coming in using the same behavior, I should be recognized, and I could be recognized, and I could just sail through, while somebody else who's exhibiting deviation from prior sessions does warrant some additional friction and controls. And so that protects the business, but it also protects the consumer. Fintechs have done a really, really nice job in that early segmentation at the top of their funnel. I see this time and time again.
Yeah, it's that personalization in a way. And if we can apply that personalization to understanding the risk, then we can appropriately use smart orchestration to apply the right measures to ensure the safety and not be so heavy-handed if the risk is indicating that for that person, not just that channel, not just that session, right, but for that person, to your point, can we personalize that risk level? That comes down to data. You need to have the data, you need to be able to process that data in real time. But I really like that idea of personalizing the risk level to deliver the personalized experience in a safe and secure way.
For sure. And I think you just hit the nail on the head. I think it comes down to data. And how do you look at that data? Can you gather the data and actually use it and analyze it and create risk predictive variables out of it? And how do you unleash that then into a model that can be used to measure risk on every session, every user? And I think fintechs have done a really good job of this. I'm starting to see more and more use of unsupervised models where fintechs are using current technology, AI, to power the use of that data and to actually create risk predictive indicators for every user, every session.
So Nash, we've talked about how fintechs have really ushered in this new era in digital banking. It's also enabled new types of fraud. The fraudsters are taking advantage of this focus on get it done fast, quick transaction, all digital. With that kind of a landscape, we've obviously, as an industry, needed new tools. I definitely believe that behavioral analysis, behavioral analytics have been a key part of that solution. And it's why we were so taken and impressed with NeuroID, and we loved it so much we bought the company. Talk to us about NeuroID and the role you guys played. You've been there from early on. This is a really important part of stopping these new types of fraud.
Absolutely, Kathleen. So NeuroID, as you mentioned, has been studying the way humans interact with sessions with machines for the last 10 plus years. And we are experts at understanding what's genuine human behavior when such an online interaction takes place versus a person that has intent to commit fraud. Behavior, just for folks who don't know it well, is a study of how humans type, touch, move a mouse, interact with tabs, copy and paste data, speed of typing, etc. There's thousands of behavioral signals as we interact with a keyboard, a mouse, a session. And NeuroID studies those, uses those in machine learning, and uses that to then predict a user's intent. Are they genuine or versus are they a fraudster? And we can, in the same token, also determine if this is automation as in a bot or is this a human. And that's really useful, as you mentioned, because in the world of today where you see all these GenAI produced fakes, bots, you see GenAI powered fraud. NeuroID does a fantastic job sitting at the top of the funnel and filtering out a lot of this bot and third-party fraud noise. So you can actually focus your business on what matters most, which is doing good business with good consumers. By segmenting early higher risk populations from lower risk populations, NeuroID can help your business then put the right amounts of friction for the right consumers at the right time. We've talked about using low friction fraud controls and coexisting fraud security versus consumer experience. And I think NeuroID helps enterprises enable that. We have a very passive solution that doesn't involve any consumer friction. And we can still secure your online experience at the top of the funnel and allow good consumers to sail through while allowing enterprises to place friction, place security controls only in front of the higher risk consumer.
Nash, as you look ahead, what one piece of advice would you give to businesses that maybe is a takeaway from how fintechs have succeeded?
I think fintechs have not hesitated in adopting testing first and then adopting new technology where it makes sense and applying it to their consumer base with great success. And I think that is the lesson learned here is don't be afraid of using new tech, because fraudsters certainly aren't afraid of using new tech to commit fraud. So why should enterprises stand back? They need to stay ahead of the game, and they need to emulate what we've seen with some of the better fintechs in understanding consumers, understanding data, using that to your advantage, using powerful modeling, using modern capabilities like behavior and biometrics and passkeys and AI models in predicting the right controls for the right amount of risk that a consumer in session is showing. I think that is key. And I think more and more enterprises need to do that quickly, be more agile. If you don't, you're just going to lose the game.
Feels like fintechs have, it It feels like Fintechs have really mastered the art of personalization and giving that great experience. I feel like we can do the same with fraud and risk. Personalize the solution that you need to address the risk associated with that person in that moment of time.
And if you do that well, Kathleen, then I feel like you can offer that low friction, tailored experience that consumers want. Mm-hmm. This is what they're asking for. They're asking to be recognized. They're asking not to face undue friction. This is a perfect way to solve for both security and experience.
As we're in Fraud Awareness Month this November, Nash, what advice do you have for consumers?
I think for me, as a consumer, being aware of the scams that are out there and the risk that is out there from those scams, a large risk of financial loss, real loss, is key. Everyone thinks they're smart and they're not going to fall for scams. I myself, as a risk manager, think I know the world of risk and scams better than most. Sometimes see scams that are so realistic that I would have easily fallen for them. And I know most consumers out there are equally aware of the online risk that's out there from voice cloning and deep fakes, and these are really real. And so consumers need to be very aware now more so than ever of this emergence of new scams, and it's very likely that every one of us will be impacted by some kind of identity theft and scams this year. And so just that awareness and how to safeguard yourself from that is important.
I think especially as we head into the end of the year, as we head into the holidays, people should be ever mindful about the preponderance of scams, how good they are, and look out for each other. Look out for your loved ones. Talk about it with your family. Be aware that the scams are out there, as we might be distracted, extra stress this time of year. This is a great time to have those discussions and look out for each other, because fraud is definitely on the rise.
No doubt. What about businesses, Kathleen? Same question. What do you think is sort of the number one thing that businesses should be worried about and be aware of as we get into the Fraud Awareness Month?
Businesses should definitely be aware that, especially as we enter this time of year where there's a higher transaction rate of all kinds. People are digitally sharing money. There's those kinds of transactions that happen. We reimburse friends when we go out for dinner, and you pay your part of the bill peer-to-peer after dinner is over, as well as all the shopping and just new transactions. There's a lot of transactions. There's a lot of places for fraudsters to hide. Let's take a tip from the Fintechs. Use a lot of data. Look how to personalize and understand the risk. Bring as many of these tools to the fight, and look for ways to use AI. There's a great way to add that assistance to your workflow and use AI to fight AI.
One thing that always strikes me, Kathleen, you can't go to a show, you mentioned Money 2020, without hearing about Agentic AI. It's coming at us. Consumers are going to use agents to shop online, to transact online. How do businesses solve for the fraud that's coming with Agentic AI? I must have heard this like a dozen times at least just in the first day.
For sure. Yes.
How do you feel about Agentic AI and this new world that's coming at us so quickly?
Yeah, I definitely think this is the new era that is upon us. And where we originally had the notion of AI and generative AI, this is the new opportunity with Agentic AI. And again, it's going to be used by businesses and by consumers to add convenience and more feature-rich experiences. But we can also expect that fraudsters are going to be using agents to commit frauds at scale. So this is something we have to be aware of, and I'm very supportive. I know you and I have been talking about this too, about standards in this space and better ways for businesses to be able to identify good, trusted agents and the consumer intent behind them.
Great point. And I know that I've been very involved in Experian's efforts in pioneering some of this work, how enterprises can go about identifying humans from non-humans, but also when it is non-human, let's say an agent, identifying the good agents from the bad ones is going to be very, very key for enterprises, and it's something that we're actively working on.
Absolutely. Well, as we wrap things up, Nash, I think it's been great to have this conversation with you. Definitely, fintechs have played a significant role in the evolution of digital banking, of consumer finance, and of creating great user experiences. And they've also been early adopters in the adoption of different and new fraud prevention techniques. I think that influence is going to continue, especially as we enter this agentic AI era. So thanks so much for having this conversation with me today, Nash. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Kathleen. Thank you.